without further ado, willkommen zu diesem 221. Webinar von Europe Calling. Und ganz besonders begrüßen möchte ich unsere heutigen Gäste, die ihr hier schon seht und die ich gleich noch genau vorstelle. Mein Name ist Maximilian Fries, ich bin der Geschäftsführer von Europe Calling und darf heute Abend moderieren. Und bevor wir loslegen, ein paar Hausmitteilungen. Wir sprechen heute einen Mix aus Deutsch und Englisch. Deutsch hauptsächlich am Anfang, Englisch dann in der zweiten Hälfte. Und damit das alle verstehen, haben wir heute wieder zwei wunderbare Dolmetscherinnen. Die Dolmetschungsfunktion findet ihr unter dem kleinen Globus in der Kontrollleiste. Und jetzt zeige ich das noch auf Englisch. Also in English, welcome to this 221st Europe Calling webinar. Today we will speak a mix of German and English. Should you need help with that, please check out the little globe in the control panel and choose English. We have two wonderful interpreters that will help with that. And on the slide I'm about to show you now, if I find it in the many, many windows that are open apparently on my machine, you can see how we do this evening. So we'll start with an introduction from Christian back from the Europa Union, and then we'll go through the countries, and we're doing the impossible to get an overview of something that's happening in many more countries that are actually on the list. But we will try, and then we have a lot of time for questions from Serbia, from Romania, Georgia, and Greece. And then a big block of questions and answers. And at the end, we'll also speak about, what each of us can do to support the protest, to spread the word, and what it all means. And if you have a few questions, so that's, I actually stayed in English. Gehe ich mal wieder auf Deutsch. Habe ich gerade gemerkt, genau, für alle, die es noch nicht gefunden haben, so läuft der Abend ab. Und wenn ihr Fragen habt, wie immer bei Europe Calling, dann könnt ihr Fragen stellen und die Fragen der anderen bewerten. Den Link dazu packe ich gleich in den Chat und ihr seht hier auch schon den QR-Code. So, und dann sage ich noch eine Sache. Wir haben genau 2000 Anmeldungen, deswegen in den Fragen gibt es zwei Räume, in Deutsch und Englisch. Stellt da so gern eure Fragen hinein, bewertet die der anderen, damit wir die Fragen stellen, die euch am wichtigsten sind. Und wir nehmen das Webinar wie immer auf und stellen das dann zum Nachschauen auf YouTube und als Podcast online. Beachtet das, wenn ihr Fragen stellt. Soweit zu den Hausmitteilungen. Und wir legen los mit unserem Übersichtstalk von Christian Beck. Christian ist Präsidiumsmitglied der Europa-Union und war dort in der Steuerungsgruppe für die Kampagne, man kann es so EU Our Hope, man kann es eigentlich nur lesen, nicht so wirklich aussprechen, zur Europawahl 2024. Die war eine coole Kampagne. Er hat arbeitet immer noch für ein Mitglied des Europäischen Parlaments, hat davor mit mir gemeinsam mal für das andere gearbeitet. Das heißt, wir kennen uns auch ganz gut und ich freue mich, dass du hier bist. Und Christian arbeitet schon ganz lange zu europäischem Föderalismus und Kampf gegen Korruption. Und mit seinem Kollegen Daniel Fehr hat er auch einen Blogpost über die Proteste geschrieben, auch mit diesem Begriff europäischer Frühling, und hat dann Europe Calling und mich angeschrieben und gesagt, hey, lass uns doch ein Webinar dazu machen. Und da habe ich natürlich direkt gesagt, yes, machen wir das. Und so ist das heute entstanden. Vielen Dank für die Initiative, lieber Christian. Und off you go.
Ganz lieben Dank. Also nur für alle, die sich gefragt haben, wie das in diesen Abgeordnetenbüros da funktioniert. Die Frisur, die Max und ich teilen, ist nicht vorgeschrieben. Gibt auch ganz andere. Heute Abend bin ich ja aber weniger als Mitarbeiter eines grünen Europaabgeordneten hier, sondern als Vertreter der überparteilichen Europa-Union. Die Europa-Union ist eine überparteiliche Bürgerbewegung mit vielen tausend Mitgliedern in Deutschland. Und die haben eine Jugendorganisation, die jungen europäischen Föderalisten. Über die bin ich damals zu dieser föderalistischen Bewegung gekommen. Die hatten auch seit 2006 schon eine regelmäßige jährliche Aktion, nämlich im ganzen europäischen Netzwerk, das die JEF hat, mit ganz vielen Sektionen in fast allen Mitgliedstaaten, Werbung zu machen dafür, dass Demokratie sehr wichtig ist und gerade in Weißrussland in großer Gefahr war, schon seit 2006. Seitdem ist die Aktion deutlich größer geworden. Aber diese dieser europäische Anspruch, dieses europäische Netzwerk so zu leben in der Verteidigung von Demokratie, war etwas, das mich dazu gebracht hat und was heute Abend, glaube ich, ganz gut passt, warum wir uns als Organisation eben auch so sehr für das Thema interessieren. Ich war ein bisschen wütend, als ich realisiert habe, dass in Europa so viele hunderttausende Menschen auf den Straßen waren, aber dass in den deutschen und belgischen Medien, die ich persönlich konsumiere, eben quasi kaum vorkam. Ein bisschen Belgrad, aber auch nicht so zentral, trotz der riesigen Zahl an Menschen. Deswegen bin ich so dankbar, dass wir heute Abend diesen 100.000 Menschen auf den Straßen auch die europäische Öffentlichkeit geben können, die, finde ich, das Thema verdient. Die These von Daniel Feher und mir in dem Artikel war, dass da hunderttausende Leute aus jeweils einem nationalen Anlass, einem nationalen Framing auf die Straße gegangen sind, aber dass es im Grunde große Gemeinsamkeiten dabei gibt, die so ein bisschen die Frage aufwerfen, ob daraus, wenn es jetzt noch kein europäischer Frühling ist, weil es keine Bewegung ist, die sich transnational bereits größtenteils versteht, aber doch zumindest das Potenzial hat, eben europaweit Wandel anzustoßen und zu verstärken in die richtige Richtung. Und deswegen so wichtig, dass wir uns heute Abend das mal genauer angucken können. Wir würden eben sagen, wenn 50.000 Menschen in Rom auf die Straße gegangen sind und da ja auch ganz viele Europafahnen geschwenkt haben, dann war das da besonders deutlich, dass es um Europa geht, dass man Europa stärken will angesichts der Herausforderungen der neuen amerikanischen Administration, die Europa da weitgehend alleine lässt mit seinen Problemen. Und einer Ministerpräsidentin in Italien, die auch ganz offen flirtet mit den Rechten in Amerika. Dass wenn in Bukarest 10.000, 14.000 auf die Straße gehen, das hieß ja auch Euro-Manifest und richtete sich ja gerade gegen einen Präsidentschaftskandidaten, der mit mutmaßlich Geld aus Russland, zumindest mit gekauften Influencern auf einer russischen Plattform, da eben groß rauskam, nachdem er vorher wenig bekannt war und sehr stark antieuropäische, anti-NATO-Positionen vertritt. Die 70.000, 80.000 in Budapest gehen gegen Viktor Orban auf die Straße, der die EU in der jetzigen Form, ja, man kann sagen, zerstören will, das Europaparlament in seiner jetzigen Form zumindest abschaffen will und viele andere Sachen schwächen will. In Tbilisi, da hören wir ja gleich noch mehr dazu, und in Belgrad ist es sicherlich verständlich, wenn man weniger Europaflaggen sieht, weil die Rolle der EU da so ein bisschen zweifelhaft ist. Aber auch da ging es ja sehr stark darum, europäische Werte im Sinne von Freiheit von Korruption, Rechtsstaatlichkeit, Demokratie zu stärken. Das wäre unsere These. Und warum ist uns diese europäische Perspektive so wichtig? Man kann ja sagen, das steht einfach für sich. Das sind jeweils nationale Bewegungen, die sollte man als solche irgendwie verstehen. Wir glauben, dass Europa eben unglaublich mächtig sein kann, wenn es nur will. Und dass sich das ja darin zeigt, dass die EU finanzielle Sanktionen gegen die Regierung von Viktor Orban, zuvor auch die von der PiS-Regierung in Polen verhängt hatte, immer noch sind über 40% der Gelder für die Orban-Regierung eingefroren, und das übt eben wirklich Druck aus. Das war aber eben auch nur erreichbar, weil das Europäische Parlament sich auf die Hinterbeine gestellt hat und parteiübergreifend, also zumindest alle Pro-Europäer, pro-demokratischen Fraktionen, gemeinsam gesagt haben: Kommission, Rat, wir wollen, dass ihr diese Sanktionen verhängt. Das können wir als Parlament nicht direkt tun, das müsst ihr tun, aber wir machen diesen Druck. Und der wurde getragen von ganz vielen Leuten, die eben auch auf die Straße gegangen sind. Und ich glaube, diese Einsicht, dass die Macht Europas groß sein kann zur Verteidigung von Rechtsstaat und Demokratie, aber eben den Druck der Öffentlichkeit braucht, das ist das, was uns da motiviert. So viel vielleicht zur Einführung.
Danke dir, vielen Dank, und sorry an alle, die die englische Dolmetschung am Anfang vermisst hatten. Es gab da ein kleines technisches Problem. Jetzt sollte sie aber laufen, und ihr solltet mich jetzt auch im englischen Kanal verstehen. Danke, Christian. Das war eine super Einführung. Ich habe auch gerade im Vorgespräch schon gesagt, das ist immer so, das merkt man so in den deutschen Medien, da ist dann mal so der eine Protest, mal der andere Protest, aber das wird die Verbindung nicht hergestellt und es gibt überhaupt gar keinen Überblick und deswegen freue ich mich so sehr, dass wir heute 4 Gäste da haben, die einfach mal sich Zeit nehmen und wir haben ganz bewusst gesagt, so, dass sie sich so 7, 8, 9, 10 Minuten mal Zeit nehmen und einfach mal berichten, einfach mal erzählen, was in ihren Ländern jeweils gerade so passiert. Und wir beginnen mit Jelena Vasiljević. Sie ist leitende wissenschaftliche Mitarbeiterin am Institut für Philosophie und Sozialtheorie der Universität Belgrade. Sie war sachverständiges Mitglied der Balkan in Europe Policy Advisory Group und ist derzeit Mitglied des European Alternatives Transnational Boards. Liebe Jelena, schön, dass du dabei bist und du hast das Wort.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and will take this opportunity to shed more light on what is going on in Serbia, but it will not be easy because it's so complex and it's so difficult to put like the main things in just 10 minutes because we're experiencing something absolutely completely new and we are emotionally overwhelmed. So it's going to be difficult. And I'm sure I'm going to miss some important things. So we are actually experiencing something that we've never seen in Serbia before. And mind you, we're really a country that had a turbulent history. You know, we had a history of protests and protests against dictators in the 90s, against Slobodan Milosevic. But what we are seeing here now is something really different. First of all, this has been going on for more than 4 months. So we are in more than 4 months of protests taking place daily. Also, there isn't a single municipality in Serbia that hasn't had one form of protest or another. So we're experiencing different forms of protests, of strikes, and it's taking place daily. So we have a couple of protests every day. Also, we had 2 largest events two of the most massive protests ever taken place in Serbian recent history. On 22nd of December, we had more than 100,000 people on the streets of Belgrade. And just a couple of days ago, last Saturday, on March of 15, some very reliable estimates said that we had somewhere between 300 and 400,000 people on the streets. So it's clearly remarkable. What is it actually? What caused it? So we can talk about immediate cause and we can talk about the root cause of the problem. The immediate cause of the problem, and maybe you've heard of it, was that on November the 1st, the canopy of a recently renovated railway station in Serbian town of Novi Sad collapsed and fell, and it killed at that time 15 people, now 16, because a couple of days ago another victim passed away in hospital. So we have 16 dead people, and nobody took responsibility. And it was a newly renovated railway station that was opened with a great pomp. And of course, it costed much more than was previously planned. But it was not just another affair, another tragedy, another instance of corruption in Serbia, because we have a series of similar tragic events for which no one ever took responsibility and no one ever we didn't see the accountability for these things. But this enraged the public, and it all started with peaceful protests and with students paying homage to the victims. It all started with every Friday, citizens and students, led by students, would pay 15 minutes, would stand in silence for 15 minutes every day from 9:52 a.m. That was the time when the canopy fell. And they would stand in silence for 15 minutes to commemorate the first 15 victims. And then in November, a group of thugs, basically, of masked men, and later it would turn out that they were actually party officials, members of the ruling party. They attacked students violently. And a couple of days later, that happened in front of the Faculty of Dramatic Arts in University of Belgrade. A couple of days later, students decided to occupy their faculty and to block it and to initiate a kind of blockade of their faculty. And then students of other faculties followed the suit. And very soon we had all faculties of Belgrade universities under occupation and blockades, and also almost all universities all over Serbia. And these students were also supported by their professors overwhelmingly. And they issued their demands, student demands, which were actually not typical political demands. They were not demands for resignation of the power. They were demands for all documents regarding the renovation of railway station to be declassified. So they want to see, and all responsible persons to be to be persecuted. So they basically asked for the basic principle, for basic rule of law. And they also asked all those who attack students and citizens to also be persecuted. They asked for imprisoned students to be released, and they asked for the government to invest more to increase the budget for the higher education. So those were very, in a way, commonsensical demands, but at the same time, they were very radical, socially radical, because they asked very clearly for accountability beyond any political demands and struggles that we have in the country. And that really incited the whole society to join them. But what is also interesting is the tool of their organizations. The students decided to organize in plenums, to organize in assemblies of students, and through direct democratic principles, they organize every day and they make their decisions. And they've been very successful in that, like enormously successful, that they organized so many events across Serbia, and then Serbian citizens responded to that with such great enthusiasm that it was something that took us all by a great surprise, not only because for years we didn't see any political commotion, any social commotion within among the population of students. So it was really surprising to see all of a sudden such great social articulation of urgent problems by the student population. And then these massive protests just became something that we are all in, through every day throughout Serbia. And not only that, but this form of organizing, of plenum organizing through direct democratic principles, that the students started advocating it, and then many organizations started organizing according to that principle. So today, we actually have across Serbia, on local levels, we have citizens gathering in their local communities on the level even smaller than the municipality, gathering weekly and organizing what we call zbor or like local plenums and trying to exercising this direct democratic principles, which is not always successful, but it shows that people are kind of willing to try something different and to learn and to participate, and they have this idea, okay, we are actually doing now a systemic social, wider social change. It's not only about political change, it's about the social change we need. So I would have many more examples to show you of that, but I actually want, because I don't have much time, I want to stress two things important for this conversation here. One is the role of EU and external and international community and leaders. And I think that Serbia is a very peculiar country in this regard. So Vučić regime, the regime that we have, has been labeled by scholars and also democracy monitoring agencies as either hybrid or illiberal or competitive authoritarian, whatever you want. It's basically a regime that we don't have fair and free elections. We have institutional capture. We have media landscape is absolutely, it's non-democratic, and media is completely controlled by the regime. And basically the ruling regime, the ruling party and President Aleksandar Vučić has the whole control on the country and all democratic and electoral processes. So this is the situation. But the EU has officially, for years, in a way, turned a blind eye to these autocratic practices because of certain interests, because Serbia is the biggest and central country in the Western Balkans, a region which is still under threat of violence and turmoils because of the unresolved relations and disputes between Serbia and Kosovo. So Vučić managed to convince them that he is the guy who can maintain stability in the region. That is also what scholars label stabilitocracy. So okay, we will turn the blind eye. You can be autocrat, but deliver what you promised the EU to deliver. Also, there are many economic interests from the part of EU countries invested in Serbia, deals with France and especially with Germany, and not to mention lithium. I think that's the biggest thing here, actually, because in western parts of Serbia, there are the biggest deposits of lithium in Europe. And EU's strategic goal is to become independent primarily from China in this whole supply of critical raw materials. And lithium is very much important for the so-called green transition, especially for electric vehicles and for basically German car industry. So this all has vested these plans to build the Rio Tinto, to build the biggest lithium mine in Europe. in the Jadar Valley in Serbia. And I think because of all these economic and political interests, EU was not strong enough, was never determined enough to condemn the autocratic practices of Alexander Vučić, you know. So unfortunately, what we have here today is that on the streets of Belgrade in Serbia, you don't see many EU flags. EU is not, and also Vučić is not perceived as someone who is against EU because he's been playing on two cards. He's nurturing the rhetoric about close ties with Russia and close economic ties with China. But at the same time, he's also a very close ally to economic interests of the EU. And also, Serbia is one of the biggest exporters of weapons to Ukraine. So this is also why it was tolerated for Serbia to have this mild rhetoric towards Russia, because effectively it was delivering what was supposed to be delivered. So we're in this situation where we don't really have this insistence from the part of EU on the rule of law, on democratic principles, but I think that economic interests have taken the primacy. And I think that this is the problem now with what's going on in Serbia. And things are escalating. This is the second thing that I want to underline, and with this I will conclude. The repression is increasing. I mean, this regime has always been repressive, and we had many instances of repression towards civil society actors, free media that are left in country. But now it's increasing. On 15th of March, during this peace protest, the regime used something that is still not identified, whether it was a sound cannon or a vortex cannon, but some kind of sound machine in a way of ultra-wave sending machine was used on protesters, and that caused a lot of panic. And it was only by mere luck that there were no victims there. So it was basically an attack on a very, very peaceful protesters. Many activists are now under arrest. So we have political imprisonments. And now repression is increasing. Yesterday and today we had announcements by the president of the parliament, that is also the former prime minister, saying that behind all this is actually the provost of Belgrade University and the deans of Belgrade faculties. And she accused them of being an organized criminal group, which can actually lead to charges and they could actually be arrested. So this is the situation that we are in. And at the same time, Ursula von der Leyen is meeting Vučić, and condemnation for Vučić are very, very mild, you know. So this is really in stark contrast with what we are actually experiencing in Belgrade. And I will stop here, and hopefully we'll maybe shed more light during Q&A session. Thank you.
Wow. Jelena, das war ganz großartig. Ich glaube, so viel in 10 Minuten zu packen und so viel zu lernen und zu sagen, das war sehr beeindruckend. Vielen, vielen Dank dafür. Ich glaube, es gibt auch schon ganz viele Fragen. Ich habe gerade mitgenommen, wie jetzt da Proteste dann auch dazu führen, dass quasi auch schon auf kommunaler Ebene Bürgerpläne eingerichtet werden und sich direkte Demokratie dann halt auch die Bürgerinnen selber einen Space bauen, in dem sie mitbestimmen können in einer Autokratie. Und das ist schon was sehr, sehr beeindruckend ist. Ich glaube, es ist nicht das letzte Mal, dass wir das hier hören werden. Und wir gehen jetzt weiter, quasi in die EU hinein, zu Claudiu Craciun. Muss sagen, ob ich deinen Nachnamen falsch ausgesprochen habe, ist Dozent für europäische Politik an der Fakultät für Politikwissenschaft der Nationalen Universität für Politik und Verwaltung in Bukarest in Rumänien. Und er forscht zu Demokratie, Parteiensystemen, Parteiorganisationen und sozialen Bewegungen. Und lieber Claudiu, wir freuen uns sehr, dass du da bist. Und jetzt der Blick nach Rumänien.
Thank you very much. While I was listening to Jelena, I mean, I had a lot of memories. I remember early 2000s being in Serbia, and the work of Otpor being kind of a very vivid and inspiring effort. And I see now what's happening there, and I try to follow, and it's simply amazing. And you know, all my heart is with the protesters there, and also it goes with the other protesters in the region, but Serbia does resonate in a certain way with me. And before going to Romania's case, I will do a bit of academic marketing. because exactly on this subject of protests and social movements in Central and Eastern Europe, I just had a book out like last month. I'm not sure you see it, Palgrave, and it covers 11 countries in the region. And to see that we have a kind of a clear interest on a comparative perspective on the region. So if you want to know more, even from an academic point of view, I'm going to leave the link to the publisher's website and my account on ResearchGate, because I can share with you the introduction to the book if you're interested. Now turning to Romania. Well, I think, Romania, it's kind of an interesting case. Why? Because I think it was a kind of a late bloomer in European integration, along with Bulgaria. We also had our share of problems with the political class and the political system, with corruption and so on and so forth. That is pretty clear. But as in the case of Serbia, the European Union kind of worked with this kind of not so clean Europeanizers. We had that in the early 2000s. Now again, I mean, it's the EU is not really good at changing power balances within the countries, not directly, but and I would say that we are today in the, let's say, the third stage of the recent protest politics and culture. And the first one started with the financial and economic crisis, where we had our anti-austerity protests in 2012. I would say that was the first moment when we saw real contention in the streets after the EU joined. And I was part of that protest. And for a few years, we were in this kind of socioeconomic alternative to neoliberalism framework. And we've done a lot of protests, for example, for environmental causes, which are also a bit anti-capitalistic or anti-corporate. And that was like roughly 4 years. In between 2016 and 2020, this kind of agenda was evacuated out of the streets and out of politics, because we had a brand of anti-corruption neoliberal protest, basically attacking a part of the political spectrum, the social democrats, as being very corrupt and Eurosceptic, while they were supporting a neoliberal agenda, and they were supporting new parties forming in this part of the spectrum. What happened in 2020, and this is another stage, was that we had the pandemic, and we have some kind of consistent contention on pandemic, let's say, grounds, and there was an unhappiness with the pandemic restrictions, and that fueled and mobilized the far-right vote, as to have in 2020 a large 10% far-right party, new one, in the parliament. And this 4 years, 2020, 2024, it was more about them mobilizing in the streets, using this kind of pandemic momentum. What happened in 2024, and we are kind of in that moment, was that during the electoral campaign, or during the presidential elections, and in Romania's political regime, we are a semi-presidential regime. The presidential office is the highest in the country. We had this big problem of a new candidate, almost no one knew him, declaring zero funds for his campaign. He came on top of the first round, using kind of a mix of kind of conspiratorial views, anti-Western, very spiritualistic in a way, that it was very difficult to kind of define, but very effective, because basically he was coming on top of a political culture that was slowly building in the last 10 years. And I think Russia had a lot of things to do with that specific political culture. And what happened basically is that kind of the society split. There was one part of the society who was rooting for this candidate and for the far right agenda, and they were taking the streets themselves. And also reaction from, say, a pro-democratic part of the society. And you see them kind of going head to head, with the far right political culture being more active and more mobilized. So what you saw in Bucharest last week, there was finally an attempt from pro-democratic and pro-European civil society group and community groups coming together and saying like a really simple thing: we're here, European, we'll support Ukraine, we don't want the far right. It wasn't a big rally. It was roughly 10 to 15,000 of people. But considering the fact that there was no political party involved, no political leaders encouraging participation, I think it was a success. And this is a different, if we were set to compare, where this is different as compared with the far right mobilization, which is very top down and is driven by leaders, political parties, and opinion leaders who are definitely involved in electoral politics, whereas the other part is much less so. So basically, right now we are in this stage of, even today we had a kind of a protest or rally from the far right groups who are actually celebrating in the streets, on the streets, the birthday of the presidential candidate who was banned from the presidential election. So yeah, we're at that level. So basically, we have elections in May, the new, fresh presidential elections with no, I mean, this far right candidate was banned, but there are others who are still in the race. So I see that this kind of reactionary democratic parallel mobilizations will continue. What's still unclear is what will happen to the presidential elections, in what kind of world we will live, because yes, Trump, well, Elon Musk set his eyes on the Romanian elections, and he was continually tweeting about the Romanian elections. So it was quite an honor to be in the spotlight. So we're basically very, very connected to whatever happens in Europe and whatever happens in the transatlantic relation, because after the elections in Germany, we were the next ones. So we kind of feel the mobilization from some groups in the American politics, some groups in European Union, and of course Russia, trying to to advance their interests during these presidential elections. So I will not take too much of your time. I would say it's very kind of intensely political right now. And I'm really happy to answer any questions that you might have on Romania, or maybe some comparative outtakes from all these cases. Thank you very much.
Ja, ganz lieben Dank, Claudiu. Wir haben bei Europe Calling auch schon sehr oft über genau diesen digitalen Raum und die Rolle von Musk auch gesprochen, also dass er sich da einschaltet. Das ist für Menschen, die öfter bei uns dabei sind, auch gar nichts Neues. Das ist ein Muster, das wir sehen. Und vielleicht schon mal als Werbung, wir machen am Montag gleich das nächste Webinar genau zu der Frage, wie auf X und auf TikTok ja auch Wahlen eben manipuliert werden. Also da ist ein ganz starker Anknüpfungspunkt. Da machen wir auch weiter, was richtig wichtig ist. Und das ist auch glaube ich, die perfekte Überleitung zu Teona. Teona ist jetzt schon das zweite Mal bei Europe Calling. Wir haben im letzten Dezember haben wir uns schon gesehen. Teona Macharashvili ist Demokratieaktivistin in Georgien und Mitbegründerin des Caucasus Open Space, eine Demokratie- und Rechtsstaatlichkeit-NGO, und ist auch Direktorin von einer Newsplattform Maisi.News für investigativen Journalismus. Und Wie gesagt, wir haben uns im letzten Dezember gesehen hier bei Europe Calling. Da haben wir mal nur über Georgien geredet, eine Stunde lang. Und ich freue mich sehr, dass Teona heute wieder dabei ist und uns quasi so ein bisschen ein Update gibt und wir die großen Linien und die Verknüpfungen hier ziehen können. Teona, schön, dass du da bist und du hast das Wort.
Thank you, Maximilian. I'm very happy to be back, seeing all of you again in this group discussion. I think it's extraordinary to listen to my colleagues from Serbia and Romania because there are so many links and similar patterns that we observe that exist in Serbia, Romania, and in Georgia. It is very strange situation to be where we are today because it feels completely surrealistic in Georgia right now. Because on the one hand, we are seeing that it is the day, almost 120 days of protest by now. And I'm not saying 4 months because we're basically counting by day because each day is completely so intense with different events and what has been going on in here. And it is very surrealistic and it's a very strange and powerful feeling precisely because it's a combination of deep hopelessness, but also deepest inspiration, but everything that has been going on. Because we are seeing that in a country of a little more than 3 million people, there has been uninterrupted protests for approximately 4 months now, ever since the de facto ruling party of Georgian Dream has announced that it will unilaterally stop integration with the European Union. This has been the greatest trigger for those uninterrupted protests to start. And I think what's really extraordinary about these protests is the intensity with which people sacrifice physical safety, economic, financial safety, and even their health in this process. Because I don't know if the word got out to our friends and colleagues in other countries, but what has been the most intense forms of protest is journalists and activists have been on hunger strike, some of them for months. And I would like to specifically point out director of the Net Gazeti and Batumelebi, Zia Amaglobeli. She has been on hunger strike for almost 2 months, and she only stopped when numerous times we had to ask her to stop. And the only reason that urged her to stop her hunger strike was because there have been other tragedies happening in Georgia, and she felt like this was taking attention away from that and putting all the spotlight on her. So that was the only reason that made us convince her to she was convinced herself to stop the hunger strike. But there has been Azerbaijani journalist Afgan Satikov who has been in this very unfair judicial system on hunger strike for a couple of months now. There have been other activists, at least 4 of them, who have been on hunger strikes for approximately a month each, and their health situation has been deteriorating as well. But other than that, I think what's also extraordinary is that this is the first time in the history of Georgia when public servants, workers of Ministry of Defense, even, not to speak of all the other ministries, but even the ministries which are as conservative as Ministry of Defense or Ministry of Finance or the others, there have been staff members, including from high-level positions, who have made public manifestations and petitions on behalf of the colleagues and staff members of those ministries, condemning violence in the streets, but also condemning termination of the approximation with the European Union. On the systemic level, I think what has been happening cannot be downplayed for a second, because it definitely feels like 1937 in the Soviet Union. It is mass repressions, it is authoritarian legislation enacted in every aspect of our lives, and it is torture of peaceful protesters. And to give you a couple of examples, on the legislative level, for example, The most recent initiatives of the de facto ruling party include, for example, introducing the second type of Putin's law. And in the previous time when they introduced the Putin's law, it didn't work because NGOs, independent NGOs, refused to register in the registry, so it didn't work. And right now they are going to harshen it even further. So basically what's happening is that if the NGO or the media or even a physical person receive any kind of funding from abroad, and there is a criminal responsibility and they may be imprisoned for a 5-year term, basically. And it's other changes like that relate to peaceful manifestation and assembly, because right now it costs a single protester approximately $2,000 just to stand in the protest, because the fine has been increased tenfold at least, and in some cases by 20 times the normal rate. And just to stand in the protest is approximately $2,000 in a country where the average salary is $500 or something like this. And some of the protesters have received 10 fines, so 2,000 multiplied by 10. And what the government did in the recent weeks is that they seized the assets of the three largest funds, because citizens and businesses, they self-organized. They created the funds to help citizens to pay off those illegitimate fines. But all three of the largest funds have been seized, and the criminal investigation has been launched against each one of them. The OSCE and Venice Commission have already evaluated and said that those laws are completely undemocratic and disproportional and have to be completely revoked, because they are not even subject to any kind of revision. What would come as most shocking is that our legislation has changed and become so authoritarian that the key words such as treason against the state have been revived again in a contemporary in 2025 in Georgia. The words that we have been hearing in the Soviet Union and the treason against the state are the words that we remember from our grandmothers who were persecuted by the communist regime, and it is completely unthinkable to have it today. You wouldn't be surprised that the word gender is being removed from every law and the policy that we have on the state level. And the explanatory note that the de facto ruling party is using for why they are removing the word gender from all of the laws is basically saying that it has been forced upon us by the global war party. So this basically goes back to something that Claudio has mentioned, that about the madness and kind of fairy tales or mythology that has become a character of the current ruling party, that basically we are hearing very shocking things in the governance that are beyond something that can feel real. So we are basically living in a very Orwellian reality right now, which feels surreal. I think what we also have to mention, apart from those shocking legal amendments, is that basically we are seeing the physical assault on activists, people, peaceful manifestors, citizens are being kidnapped from the streets. And we're expecting that basically in the coming months, the free media and the free civil society in Georgia are going to be wiped out because of the both physical threats as well as the legislation that has criminalized any forms of protest in Georgia. When it comes to torture, the statistics are also quite shocking. We still have approximately 50 people who are being detained in the courts, and the courts have been recently refusing and rejecting any kind of media or international society to attend those court hearings, because when some of the ambassadors or some of the media have attended previously, they openly said that basically the judiciary is an extension of the de facto ruling party because they did not take into consideration any evidences presented by the defense side, and they have used all of the fabricated witness statements by the police to basically imprison completely innocent peaceful protesters. And right now we have 7 people who are in prison already convicted and 50 people who are in pretrial detention. So situation is quite difficult, but also, as I've mentioned in the beginning, it is completely extraordinary to see that thousands of public servants are protesting, businesses are protesting, and hundreds of thousands of citizens have been protesting in an uninterrupted manner for 4 months now. And this is something that's completely unprecedented and obviously very emotional to see. I will stop here. I'm assuming that there will be a lot of questions. Ja.
Danke, Teona. Ja, Solidarität in solchen Zeiten, das fühlt sich manchmal so ein bisschen leer an, aber wirklich große Solidarität und auch irgendwie Wünsche im Angesicht dieser Repression. Das ist einfach krass, auch von dir zu hören, was du jetzt wieder erzählt hast, wie sich das auch nochmal aus der schlimmen Situation, die es im Dezember schon war, noch mal weiterentwickelt hat. Und mir ist auch aufgefallen, dass du das gesagt hast, so aus Gesetzen wird jetzt der Begriff Geschlecht herausgestrichen. Das ist ja auch das, was in den USA gerade auch passiert. Also da sind ja wieder diese Verbindungen von auch dieses Kampfes gegen die Sprache ja, die diese Autokraten auch miteinander verbinden. Und das ist schon sehr ja, eine wirklich erschreckende Entwicklung, die es da gibt. Und jetzt gehen wir wieder ein Stück nach Westen zu Myrto Santopoulou. Sie ist Beraterin für gemeinnützige Organisationen und hat in Griechenland schon ganz, ganz viel gemacht, auch außerhalb von Griechenland. Myrto und ich, wir sehen uns sehr, sehr häufig, weil wir beide bei der Democratic Odyssey dabei sind, der Kampagne für eine europäische Bürgerinnenversammlung. Das heißt, wir sehen uns eigentlich fast jeden Mittwoch und da freue ich mich, dass ich dich heute dann auch wieder an einem Mittwoch sehe. Und sie hat in Griechenland auch mit ganz vielen NGOs und lokalen Initiativen zusammengearbeitet. Und ich bin jetzt total gespannt, was dein Blick auf die Lage in Griechenland ist, aber auch wie das damit zusammenhängt, was wir sonst so gehört haben und was sonst so passiert. Mirto.
Hi, Max. Thank you, and thank you to Europe Calling for inviting me on this important conversation and try to add a bit on the the Greece perspective of things. Some things are similar, especially with my Serbian friend on the chat, with regards to also the apparent reason for the demonstrations, which was also a rail accident. I'll give some background information, kind of as a contextual information on Greece. First of all, as you all know very well, Greece has relatively recently exited a very difficult and turbulent period of an economic crisis, and this was full of demonstrations and very hard anti-systemic sentiment being fueled, lots of destruction, a lot of difficult situations that happened in this country for the past decade, so the decade of 2010 up to, say, 2017, 2018. And we have entered since then, so to speak, and certainly compared to my colleagues in Georgia, for example, a relatively more stabilized and calm period of democratic process. So we are I'm mentioning this because we are sensitive to not going back to this anti-systemic, violence fueled protest situation that happened back then, and I'll come back to that later. Secondly, in terms of the Greek situation overall, we do have a history, and apart from what happened during the Greek crisis, we do have a history of frequent demonstrations and road closures and strikes, but they are almost always led by unions, political parties. So it's the interests of particular groups of people, advancing their interests and demonstrating for their interests. What we saw on the demonstration that I'll explain a little bit later on was extraordinary and very much different from that, as with regards to the massiveness and the volume, the importance and the heterogeneity of the group. So like everybody was out in the street in the recent protests that we will analyze. But this is not something that we are used to here, like in other European countries where you can easily or relatively easily have with a common sentiment and a political sentiment of reaction that gets people out in the street. We are not really used to that as a heterogeneous group. And generally, to add to that, we have overall, I mean, this is measured and this is true. I mean, for all of us living here and working towards changing it, a relatively low level of civic engagement. Also compared to our European counterparts, I think we share, the lack of engagement, disengagement with the current political system and all of that. But in general, low levels of volunteerism, low levels of, of activism and democratic engagement apart from the elections. And again, even then, the numbers are relatively low, depending on the time. So the incident that happened 2 years ago was, again, with our Serbian friends. We are connected through tragic accidents. We had a very tragic accident in our railway system. Two things about that enraged the public and that led to massive demonstrations 2 years down the line. So this was the end of February of this year. And it is astonishing that the demonstrations and the anger of the public has been fueled throughout these 2 years and is really erupting not then but 2 years down the line. That I think is poignant to a lot of things. First of all, the incident itself. I mean, through a lack of necessary infrastructure, control systems, things that should have happened on a systemic level of railway operation failed entirely, and two lines were led one against the other by the system that was not equipped to deal with such circumstances or avoid that through a human mistake by the controller. And so two trains, went right into each other and crashed and led to the death of 57 people, most of them young people, most of them students traveling from Athens to Thessaloniki, so from the capital to the second largest city in the north. And that, of course, renders everything much more important when it comes to students being killed and to a massive amount in such massive numbers. And to the public sentiment being mobilized. So the incident itself is a result of chronic problems that have to do with how the state operates, and not only in the railway system, and corruption, delays, lack of funding, and lack of attention that has led to the accident happening. The second element, which has enraged people and has led to the protests 2 years down the line, has been the handling in the aftermath of the accident. So on the one hand, there hasn't been justice served still, and there's been very high suspicion, and I'm very carefully using my words here, because you can talk to somebody else and you can have them speak of amazing corruption and hiding of serious criminal activity. I'm not gonna be the judge of that, but what we have concrete indications of is that there's been difficulty in handling this case in terms of how justice has been or has not been assigned, in terms of how the investigation is ongoing, and especially involving the political parties and the relevant ministries and the relevant politicians that have been involved in terms of assigning justice to them and investigating the incident. So in terms of investigation and the process of assigning justice, there's serious anger around how this is happening or not happening. The second thing that has happened, the third thing that has happened with regards to the accident that has led, I think, to this to this anger has been the assumption of responsibility from this government. I think the public has not seen an honest and genuine, assumption of, okay, what has happened is terrible, which of course has been, and we have done mistakes that we will correct, right? We have not seen this and felt that this is the case. Instead, what we see overall is what we usually see in Greece, which is like a tennis match between, political parties blaming the other party, and especially when it comes to chronic problems leading to such tragic accidents, this is not so difficult to do. And then again, we end up with a polarization between the one and the other. What we saw, there's been a series of demonstrations since then as well, but the massive demonstration I want to focus on is on the exact anniversary of 2 years since the accident, and it was on the 28th of February 2025, so less than a month ago. And in terms of the numbers, again, they vary, but demonstrations happen not only in Athens and Thessaloniki, and we're talking about minimum 1 million, maximum maybe 2 million, and across 260 cities around Greece and around the world, from Greeks around the world. So this was a massive protest that whoever attended saw that it was a huge heterogeneous crowd attending and expressing different kinds of messages, perhaps. So you could have people that think that the prime minister did something to conceal the workings of the accident, and actively, that you had chants about the prime minister being a murderer. You had students, you had people, of older age, you had very peaceful protests and people that did not overall, express as much anger. You had very different origins of the reason to go out in the street, but the common denominator of what we have been reading, not only those of us who attended, but everything that we've read and discussed after that in Greece has been, that this is enough. This is not acceptable. This is the common message and the common, like the common denominator of everybody that was there. What was interesting compared to the introduction that I gave before with Greece was that this was, despite being discussed as being led by anti-systemic forces, political parties of the opposition parties and everything else, and there was outcry prior to the demonstration with regards to the people attending, calling on the destabilization of the government, calling on fears of going back to 10 years ago, where we indeed have a very destabilizing situation. And I think the public itself on that day gave a very powerful message against all that and proved with its presence that this is just not true. And what happened and led all these people in the street is much larger than the interest of political parties or the efforts to polarize on the one hand or the other, on the one direction or the other. Of course, as with all of these cases, these kinds of demonstrations need not only the powerful sentiment, which is anger against a very specific, very hurtful incident and tragic incident that happened and that really sentimentally affects all of us, but also the underlying feeling that everything that's been happening so far is not acceptable, with different readings from everybody else. And of course, it took, and I think that did make a difference, and especially if we compare this response, the public response to this accident with regards to other tragic accidents that had preceded, and we do have many state failures that have led to tragic accidents resulting in the death of innocent people. But we did have members of the Parents Association, the parents of the children that have been killed, that have been very vocal, very prominent, have kept the issue loud and clear throughout all these 2 years. So in the aftermath, two things I want to mention, and then perhaps we can discuss along those and drawing on common points, not only with our Serbian friend, but across, the 4 countries that have been discussed. there still is, I mean, in terms of the political response, okay, there's been a government reshuffling. We are still remaining to be convinced about substantial changes. I don't think anybody's convinced, and we're still on a wait and see kind of situation. But the message to an extent has been received for sure, and how could it not be? And there is an intense, even before demonstration, but certainly after, an intense debate, especially in the current political climate, which is increasingly destabilizing, and especially with Greece's past, which has been a past of instability and strong anti-systemic powers that have not led to anything good. So there's a debate between, on the one hand, those claiming that the anti-systemic powers should not be given too much rise. There have been, of course, in polls, rise in the smaller anti-systemic parties. The leading party has lost significant power, but the key, systemic, so to speak, democratic parties have not gained that loss. It all went to the anti-systemic party. So this credibly leads to worries, and especially given the current political climate and Greece's past. On the other hand, this strong democratic expression and the not led by a particular party or particular forces, democratic engagement that connected us all and that has led us to democratically engage in such a way, is something that I think we need to keep in a country that is not used to, as active democratic and civic engagement as other countries in Europe. So balancing the two is, I think, important.
We need to come to an end. I'm sorry. So maybe 2 or 3 last sentences, or we do it in discussion.
Thank you.
Sorry to cut you off. So thank you all so much. And I have in the question, there are so many, questions and comments, and I want to read one comment to you. And I think that encapsulates very much what I'm thinking and what we were thinking when we set up this webinar. It's like somebody says in German, like a full solidarity with the protests and the people. And this is exactly what I want to say. So, I mean, when we now discuss about this and now we heard all this, I think my thoughts and my solidarity, and I think all of us are with the people, that are in prison, that got hurt, that are in danger, that are on the streets. So it's really, it's amazing if people, as you all said, are taking up to the streets, despite all the repression that there is. In some countries it's more, some countries it's less repression, but a lot of solidarity and a lot of courage to carry on. And and the question actually continues, or the comment here continues actually with what can we do as let's say Western Europeans here in Germany or anywhere else to help and support those protesters. And that's exactly what we want to talk about also then towards the end and now in discussion. So when it comes to discussion now, we'll have many questions. So I try to ask the questions with the most votes. We will do it in a way that I will mostly of the questions I will just say in the room, and then you can use your hand symbol here on the panel. The panelists can just raise their hand like this, and so because we don't have to all answer all the questions, so we can do a little round and then see how many questions we can get through. So I will start with the top question. That is from someone who didn't give his name, but I think a very important question. Is says in German, I have the feeling that Europe is not, I'm saying it in German actually. Ich habe das Gefühl, dass Europa nach wie vor nicht wehrhaft genug ist. Warum ist man zum Beispiel gegenüber Orban, der auch noch privat so stark von der EU profitiert, nach wie vor so nachsichtig? Und die Frage würde ich gerne als erstes Christian weggeben. Der arbeitet in seinem Tag in his day job. Sorry, I should switch back to English. So it works in his day job actually a lot on the situation in Hungary, which we haven't covered today directly, but also the question EU, how can the EU be strong against autocrats, both within the European Union but also outside. So maybe you can say a couple of words about Hungary and then also about the role of the EU in there.
Sehr gerne. Mein Chef, für den ich neben meiner Europa-Unionstätigkeit auch arbeite, war gestern noch auf einer großen Demonstration. Da wurden in Budapest auch Dutzende Europaflaggen bewegt. Es gibt trotz einer Situation, die ja auch in Ungarn bedeutet, dass fast alle Medien unter der Kontrolle der Regierung sind, gespendet in eine große Stiftung, die alle geführt von einem Freund des Premierministers. Im Gegenzug für die Leute kriegen irgendwie Teile der EU-Fonds zugeteilt in korrupten Netzwerken und dann kaufen sie mit dem Geld Medien und die schenken sie dann dem Premierminister zurück. Auch da ist es ja schwierig, wirklich durchzukommen und trotzdem, trotz schwieriger Wahlen, in denen da alles schon gedreht ist und es sehr, sehr schwierig ist, wo die Regierung ständig vorkommt und die Opposition irgendwie einzelne Minuten hat. Trotz dessen gibt es jetzt diese Massenproteste auch dort. Und ich glaube, von allen Ländern, die wir jetzt diskutiert haben, ist ein Machtwechsel in Ungarn vielleicht sogar mit am wahrscheinlichsten, weil jetzt zum ersten Mal tatsächlich die Opposition relativ stabil mehrere Prozentpunkte vor der Fidesz-Regierungspartei liegt. Jetzt gibt es natürlich noch viele Feinheiten im Wahlsystem zu beachten, aber das bedeutet, dass da vielleicht der größte Druck auf die Regierung aus diesen Protesten wirklich erwächst, dass es zu einer Änderung kommen kann. Ich glaube, das hängt auch damit zu tun, dass ja, der Fragesteller hat recht, man kann viel mehr tun. Es gibt im Europaparlament viele, die setzen sich dafür ein, dass Orban alle seine Gelder eingefroren bekommt und dann vielleicht auch die Finanzmärkte mit Druck ausüben würden, dass das so nicht weitergehen kann. Da wäre mehr möglich, aber es sind eben immerhin 40% der Gelder eingefroren. Es gab jetzt eine Pressemitteilung einer Arbeitsgruppe im Parlament, die gesagt hat, dieses Pride-Verbot, also dass die Versammlungsfreiheit in Ungarn jetzt gesetzlich auch eingeschränkt werden soll, dass Pride-Paraden gar nicht mehr stattfinden können, weil das bringt ja Kinder in Gefahr, dass das eben auch wirklich gar nicht geht. Jetzt ist es oft so, dass solche, also fast karikaturhaften autoritaristischen Symbole oft noch benutzt werden, um dann die noch korrupteren Machenschaften dahinter zu verbergen. Genauso wie mit den Anti-Gender-Kämpfen und so. Also da passiert durchaus einiges und ich glaube, ja, bei Ungarn kommt es jetzt sehr auch auf die nächsten Wahlen an, Anfang oder im nächsten Jahr, ob sich dieser Druck weiter so hält. Und ich glaube, dass da die Leute besonders viel erreichen können. Die EU hat da vor allem die Verantwortung, eben nicht das korrupte System weiter zu finanzieren. Und da könnten wir durchaus noch einen guten Schritt weitergehen. Wenn ich noch ganz kurz darf, zwei Reaktionen zu den anderen. Es gab den Punkt, die EU tut auch sonst nicht so viel zur Power Balance in den Ländern. Also es war, die EU verteilt Milliarden in den Fonds und die gehen halt in der Regel an die Regierung und die Eliten und die verteilen die dann weiter und nutzen die zum Teil auch zum Zementieren ihrer Rolle. Es ist aber auch so, dass die EU dazugelernt hat und eben die Europäische Staatsanwaltschaft inzwischen auch besteht und die wenn Gelder verschwendet werden, auch wieder zurückholen kann. Also dieses Institutionen bilden, das ist unglaublich wichtig und mächtig, um im Detail dann doch was erreichen zu können. Und zum Thema, was man bilden muss, Banden bilden ist wichtig. Also Zivilgesellschaft haben jetzt mehrere andere angesprochen, Claudiu, Teona, wie entscheidend NGOs dabei waren, Proteste zu organisieren, nicht abhängig zu sein von bestimmten Parteien, die auch im Zweifelsfall an Glaubwürdigkeit verloren haben. Bin auch hier für eine NGO heute Abend. Also die Wichtigkeit, Mitglied zu werden in einer Nichtregierungsorganisation, um sowas systematisch zu unterstützen oder zumindest Teil der E-Mail-Listen, der WhatsApp-Gruppen, wie auch immer dieser Gruppen zu werden, um sich selber weniger alleine zu fühlen mit diesen oft verzweifelt machenden politischen Situationen, um aktivierbar zu sein, wenn es dann darauf ankommt. Das ist, glaube ich, eine ganz wichtige Lektion auch daraus. Aber vielleicht kommen wir da später nochmal zu.
Thank you, Christian. And we have more questions here. One is directly to Jelena, a bit more background on Serbia. Maybe we got a lot of votes. Maybe you can answer that quickly. I actually give you two questions, and then the others can also jump in. So one is directly onto Serbia from Thomas. He's from Rotterdam in the Netherlands. He asked, how much do you perceive an awareness of protesters about Vučić's ties to Milosevic and the Serbian genocide on the Bosnians under the latter's instigations under Milosevic rule? And the second question is, I think it's a very interesting question actually for all of you. So do you believe that the number of Serbians protesting has reached the 3.5%? Thomas says that some sociologists have identified as needed for affecting social change, even ousting dictators and autocrats of any time. So how many people are there actually on the streets, and is it enough also to affect the change that we're speaking about?
Thank you, and thank you for the questions. Well, the first question was about the awareness, whether there exists an awareness of Vučić's tie with Milosevic. I mean, everybody knows that he was a prime minister. He was a minister of information during Milosevic's government. He was a very young and promising politician. He was only 27, 28, but he was Minister of Information in the 90s, actually during the NATO campaign in 99, where all media were under a special restriction in a way. He was the Minister of Information during that period. So everybody's aware of that. Not only that, but we also have Milosevic's party in the government. So the Socialist Party of Serbia, Milosevic's party, and even politicians that were active from that party in the 90s, like Ivica Dačić, for example, they are in the government. So we are all aware of these continuities. As for the war atrocities and genocide in Bosnia, that's a very interesting question, because this is a new generation now that maybe problematically, in my opinion, problematically, states that it's none of their concern. I mean, they say, okay, we are born in 2002, 2003. We think that all the divisions that exist in society, we don't want to be part of that. We don't want to be part of these constant quarrels in society and constant divisions of like what happened in the 90s and your victims, our victims. So they kind of want to stay away from that. I find it a bit problematic. Maybe it's a generational thing, I don't know. But they are not addressing this. It's an interesting thing how they want to go. I mean, I'm talking now about student movement and protest movement. They're trying to be above the political and ideological divisions, which is in a way good, but it also opens maybe some space for certain problems. So because we are deeply divided societies on many questions, and they're trying to say, okay, we had to find some common denominator. We know that we are diverse. We students are diverse, ideologically diverse. We want to talk about things that can unite us. And this is like, we want responsibility, we want accountability, we want to know what happened, we want responsible government and accountable government, we want institutions to function, and we want to live in that kind of society. We don't want to talk about ideologies, politics. So now that has some consequences, because now they are kind of all political parties, and even some very, even the biggest NGOs, because Christian was mentioning the role of NGOs, they are now, in a way, they're at the side. The whole protest movement alienated them for a good reason, in a way, because political opposition was not really helpful, I have to say, in Serbia. So we started with this. We have pan-social movement that is really truly big. Like, opposition has never managed to gather so many people, never managed to mobilize society as a whole. So they did something that was unimaginable for the opposition, and it's truly remarkable. It truly is. But now we are at this position. Okay, so what do we do now? We need the next step. We need some kind of political articulation, and for that we need political parties, and we also need to address these other questions that were avoided. So to answer shortly, they don't. It's not at the forefront. The 90s and the question of genocide is simply not something that the people are addressing. But it's also very difficult in a country like Serbia, where Vučić monopolized this narrative that the West wants to portray us as criminals, as those who did the genocide. So it's like, if it's totally this generation kind of grew up under this thing. It was not just Vučić; it's also Milosevic before him. So it's really difficult for them. So I wouldn't criticize them much for not addressing openly this issue. And for
I find this. Maybe we can stick with that, because I think that might actually be a common thread as well. Because I think, also looking at Germany, where we have especially a lot of young people now voting for the far right, that are openly basically apologizing, second, or kind of saying that, the Third Reich and the Second World War, this was all not so bad, and we don't talk about this, and maybe it's the one good thing. So the far right is always very, very close to the Nazis. So they're basically a neo-Nazi party in Germany as well, right? So, and especially young people, when they don't have that experience anymore. And in Germany, I think it maybe took just a bit longer, because it was so much in a way bigger. But now we have a young generation that has no or very little connection to this historical past, and that makes them also open to those parties and to those movements.
But I would be very reserved here. I don't think that youth and students in Serbia are close to right-wing ideologies and parties. I would never claim that. I don't think that they're just avoiding because they know that opening this issue would open divisions, and they're trying to retain the momentum of unity. I don't think they are very prone to.
I misunderstood, but this is still. Okay, yeah, understood. So, but
they're not anti-immigrant, or you don't see anything. So it's they're really trying to make a pan-social movement, and they simply want to avoid the questions that open deep divisions. And it's a bit a peculiar thing in Serbia, I have to say, right? But they're also refraining from all other political issues that can open divisions. And that is going to be a problem, because at one point you have to enter the political arena, and political arena is inevitably arena of different competing interests and of difference.
Yeah, so Claudiu, that would be interesting, because you've written this book about this, and looking at so many. So how do you see the role of especially young people, and also the question about how do you connect with political partners? How do you stay away from politics? Is that kind of a common thread?
Well, that's the big issue. And I'll also address the second big issue. It's how you actually turn into kind of structural and institutional transformation. Because you see social movements, protest events coming and going. They might be very long or very spread. But at some point, if you don't transfer them to some kind of institutionalized politics, well, it could be all in vain, or it can get perverted, or it can have even kind of a rollback effect. So I'm really worried about that, because sometimes, and I'm really on the same page with Teona and Jelena, there is a lot of repression, soft and hard repression against protests. But sometimes it's almost easier to do that rather than become institutionalized at the political level. Forming parties, raising signatures, supporting an electoral campaign, earning mandates that they can turn into policies. So, at some point it's easier to take the streets with whatever there is, rather than forming a party or a coalition and really trying to change something. And I really feel that's one, let's say, psychological step that you might want to take. There are problems, because you cannot make everyone happy, especially if you take a political stance or an ideological stance. This kind of populistic zeitgeist, I think it's a bit out of the fashion. But still, I would say that you need to find ways to institutionalize your agenda as a protest movement. And I'm not sure what's the best way for each country, but it's definitely needed. And the second point that I want to raise is this idea of maybe kind of transnational solidarity, or is there a kind of pan-European agenda of protests? And I have to say that your discussion of history is fascinating, because I think there's the answer. Frankly, if it goes like now, if the Trump administration continues its political positioning, if Russia does the same as it does for now, and if they find enough, power groups in our societies to align with them, I think we're going for a European civil war, not a kind of civil war as in the Spanish Civil War, but I have to say that the images on the streets of Tbilisi or Belgrade, or in even Budapest from time to time, Bucharest, they're not far from this imaginary of an European civil war. And this is because, let's be frank about it, we are seeing an international concert of far-right forces. And if we don't see it, I don't think how we can articulate a pan-European democratic movement which is anti-fascist and anti-reactionary. And at least in Romania, and I'll try to be brief, at least in Romania, after the first round of the presidential elections, which was annulled, I saw the first people who would openly saying in the streets that they're anti-fascists, because we had a fascist running for elections, and he was he was saying good things about our interwar fascist movements. So we cannot just say, well, I don't know, this is just, some kind of strange politics. No, this is reviving the interwar fascist movements in Europe with the help of Russia and with the help of the Trump administration. So if they do it, I think we can safely say that we are anti-fascist, and this is part of a pan-European movement with, of course, national agendas, national differences. But I think this is the historical moment we are in. Thank you.
Wow. Well, that's powerful. I want to give that to Teona. What do you think? Do you feel very much, is it, or how do you feel about what he said? I don't want to give it a direction. Teona.
Yes, I think what Claudio said is so very important. Obviously, I'm a citizen of Georgia, and my work and my activism has been always related to Georgia, and it's a better place for maybe people from the EU to talk about what they observe around themselves. But being on the outside and looking inside, and someone who has been aspiring to become part of the European Union, I think that it also makes us really concerned in Georgia as well when we see the possibilities that something that we have been aspiring to is also might be a little bit more vulnerable than what we would have wished it to be. Because the important thing is that if you zoom out a little bit and take a broader look, maybe for the citizens of the European Union and European Union countries, EU feels a little bit different because you have a little bit more zoomed in perspective on what are the current challenges. But it's important to understand what the European Union means for the people who are looking from the outside in. For us, European Union has become the symbol of justice, of fairness, of basically everything that we struggled for generations and generations. And I think that because this is such a very powerful hope and the symbol, especially now that America has been lost to the idea of the free and democratic world with everything that has been going on, our own legislation indicates Trump administration as the reason for why they would remove the word gender from their legislation. So you understand why I say that America is lost to us in this way. So European Union is basically the last hope for every country outside the European Union who aspires for freedom, for every activist in Azerbaijan or Armenia or Georgia or the other countries who are basically thinking, well, should I keep on fighting for my freedom and for the just society? Or, should I give up? Because you see that the greatest symbol that is there is also, is vulnerable like that. So I think that one of the most important things to think about is how contagious those things can be. Because in the region of Georgia, I think the greatest power of the European Union is not just in its practical de facto power that it has, but also in the projected or perceived power of how stable and sustainable its democratic institutions and its justice institutions are. And we shouldn't downplay sort of the projected aspect of the power of the European Union, which is basically one of the reasons why I think it has been a hope that fueled the hope of so many hundreds and thousands of people in Georgia who have been protesting despite all odds. And somebody asked about the statistics, and I want to stress that with emigration and everything, I think there are approximately a little bit more than 3 million people in Georgia. And the biggest protest we had included 300,000 people. So you understand that the percentage, it's very surely 5% at least of people who are constantly protesting, but it sometimes reaches double that number. So approximately 1/10 of population or something like this. What Claudiu again has been saying again about those vulnerabilities that exist, what makes me also worried is that when we look at how the right-wing and ultra-conservative movements have been promoted in Georgia, it feels like as if we are the laboratory, a testing ground for Russia for what it plans to do in Europe after us. So basically to eat up slowly and, piece by piece, the free space, the space for civil society or the human rights. Because I think one of the most powerful aspects of the propaganda of the de facto ruling party has been exactly what my colleagues have said from Serbia and from Romania and Greece. They have been saying that, we are going to bring you stability. We're going to bring you protection from war. And this is why you should choose us. So if you're looking at the population of Georgia, for 10 years, every year in a row, absolute majority of Georgians have said that we want to be part of the European Union because the values, the justice, the fairness, this is something that is very organic to us, to Georgians. So 90%, 96%, 86%, those are the numbers, right, of people who said they want to be part of the European Union for 10 years in a row. That's not a small number. And even despite this powerful support, through this Russian disinformation campaigns and the media sources that have been promoting the fear, powerful fear among the society, it has been in part a little bit successful as well among those very few groups that are supporting the de facto ruling party. Then they're saying basically that, yes, we want democracy, we want European Union, but what if after this government leaves, there will be an invasion on Georgia? So I don't think we should downplay the effect that basically it's the same playbook that's being tested in Georgia. And if it succeeds here, it can be very, very contagious and spread out to the other countries. But also as a symbol of hope, the world is looking basically at what's happening in Georgia and in other places, so that they're deciding whether or not they should keep on fighting for the freedoms and democratic values, or whether they should just give up. So yeah, I'm sorry for the long answer.
No, I think it was great. I think it was, I had to think about today or yesterday the new Eurobarometer numbers were published. So there's an all-time high of Europeans thinking and saying that the European Union is benefiting themselves and their countries. So there's an all-time high favorability for the European Union within the union. So it's really, I think, what you make like this beacon of hope, the beacon of freedom, now that the US is basically gone. I mean, it's such important message. And I would personally love that also, that, you know, sometimes I feel that you know, doesn't arrive, and I'm looking at Christian here, but also the others, doesn't really arrive in Brussels. Like I think the union has become so, in a way, also technocratic, that really this feeling, this idea, and those values, I mean, it's all about, you know, budgets and, you know, everything, that's all important. But what is the union actually stands for? And I wanna Christian is showing up, so we will go overtime for a few minutes, but I think we're on a very key point here. So I'm gonna take Christian as well on that.
Yeah, like that was exactly the idea of this webinar, that like there are thousands and thousands of people on the streets and we don't hear each other enough. Like most of the German audience probably before this webinar hasn't heard so much about these mass demonstrations, although I would find they are more important news than others. And even in the institutions, this doesn't arrive enough of a momentum from that. Because in the end, it's so powerful when like billionaires and like, I mean, the Chinese government sort of with TikTok buy the infrastructure of the public and create this false impression that the hate against minorities and the hate against the EU and messages that the Kremlin pushes, that like Elon Musk invests massively money in, because they fear the potential power of the EU to be on eye level with them. Like Elon Musk fears the EU because it's the only government he hasn't been able to buy and that is on eye level with like regulating him. So I think it's therefore that this is so powerful. And in the end, anti-fascism, anti-authoritarianism is what the idea of Europe is born from, right? Like in the 50,000 pro-EU demonstration in Rome that brought it on the front pages of Italian newspapers, it led to the debate where post-fascist Prime Minister Meloni said, she read the Manifesto of Ventotene, like one of the founding documents for a stronger Europe. There's stuff in that she doesn't like. Yeah, sure. Like, I mean, if you come from a post-fascist tradition, if you come from the tradition of the person that put the author of the document in a prison island, then sure, you probably don't like that. So the question is, will the public, like my co-author had the idea to speak about 1848, like when the citizens forced the monarchs of Europe to give the citizens more power. And indeed, at the moment, strengthening Europe oftentimes goes to a degree to the disbenefit of the power of member state governments. So you would need the pressure of the public, of thousands and thousands of people in the streets, like you see now, to really strengthen Europe so that it can work so effectively, like the people rightfully demand, so that Europe would be more effective in protecting the rule of law against corruption, so that it would be more effective in not wasting enormous amounts of money that are invested now in defense, but really from the billions that are now taken in the hand, create a defense that actually delivers what it promises. So like, it's exactly this public pressure that is necessary for the EU institutions to work and to be so loud that in the end, the people are louder than the lobbyists that we are too oftentimes alone with in the EU institutions. They also have their role to play, but like they oftentimes like do not necessarily strengthen this European togetherness, this more integration that we would need now to deliver to these manifestors that Europe can deliver to, if it wants to, if the elected hear the cries for this loud enough.
Thank you. And I want to give, we're going a bit over time. I want to give Mirto actually maybe the last comment, because you've spoken so much in the Q&A, and I know you're working so much on like the role of democracy and deliberative democracy, getting a citizen's stronger voice. So do you think that, when we ask the question that Claudio basically brought up, right? So how do we get from the protests everywhere, whatever the triggers are, how do we get from there to kind of a democratic form of expression that is not necessarily protest, but is institutional, where people have a say? I mean, Jelena mentioned like the boards and the citizens plenaries and stuff like that. So how do we go from where we are to a better, more democratic European Union? Well, big question.
Yeah, an easy question for the end. Yes, thank you. No, I think that's a very hard question, and it's a question that we're all here to answer. I mean, again, for countries in Europe as a whole that do not struggle necessarily with instability and with such amazing abuses of human rights and threats to democracy as, for example, Teona has been describing. There's always the balance that we need to keep between healthy democratic expression and, keeping the bar high, so to speak, and not accepting, things that we should not be accepting. And balancing that with the immense powers given social media, given our friend Elon Musk mentioned many times, and given everything that's been happening, amazing, powerful, powers to harness dissatisfaction and the sentiment and the tendency to protest and lead this into the break of the system, anti-systemic, be it the far right or the far left, as we've been experiencing here as well. The dangers are there. I think two things. First of all, something that's been obviously described by almost all of us prior to this. This is a critical time for us to remember the strong democratic and European values that we were all here for. And in times of crisis, these are more apparent. And these are the powers that bind us. And everything and anything that each country does, and NGOs on every level, and on behalf of the European Union as a whole, I don't know through which mechanism, but reminding us of what's binding us and what everything is important, and we do need to fight for the things that, are not a given anymore is important. And secondly, to answer the question, I think any system of democratic participation through constructive dialogue, through citizens panels, through online panels, through everything that bridges the gap between policymakers on any level, European or national, and the citizens is important. And of course, this brings the situation and the discussion down to dialogue, to recommendations, to constructive, ways forward, and not to just protest and not knowing exactly sometimes what we protest for or what we want and ask for. So I think balancing the demands for change and of democratic engagement with the threats of, working within democracies and between, among a democratic framework is important. Giving the voice to the people, but in a constructive and balanced way. In countries that are not as threatened as Georgia, I mean, I have to say this is not comparable to anything that we have experienced in Greece, for example, and it cannot have common answers.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? So because you need to have that space for that, and the repression is closing the space very much. And then I actually, so I'm looking at Jelena here, and I feel that you might want to come in just for a minute and closing here, because in Serbia, I find this very, very exciting and interesting in a way that repression that is now happening is then going together with the new direct democratic ways at the very low level. So maybe we can end on that note, and you can maybe say a few words what you're thinking about this, what we just heard. So I give you the last word. Sorry, I'm moving around a bit, but I think it's somehow important. I just want to hear from you again.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting what is going on, that people are willing to experiment with this. They are very much attracted to this idea. And I have to say, it's also interesting how it came, with the direct democratic organizing and organizing through plenums happened in Balkans before when students blocked faculties in Belgrade 2005, then in Zagreb 2010, then in Bosnia we had massive citizen plenums, but that was always linked in a way to some clear ideological stances. It was also echo of what was going on in 2010 and 2011 globally, with movements like Indignados, Occupy, and it was always part of this revitalization of the left, But now it's interesting that it's taking place with no clear ideological connections. Like nobody's claiming we're trying to revitalize the left. We just think that it's the most natural way of deciding upon things. So people are trying to organize, and it's a very fresh, it's new. Sometimes it's even comic, and it's like, like when a baby tries to walk, it's almost, many Viber groups, even in my community, people are trying to organize this, and they don't know how to do it. And sometimes they call students who have now the 4-month experience of doing plenums every day. So that's also interesting. They call the students to explain them the rules of how do you debate, what's the role of moderator, how do we reach decisions. And that's very interesting because people are willing to learn new things, and I think it's a great thing. It's kind of, but I don't know if when the repression kicks in and when the regime tightens the grip on the society, whether we will still be this enthusiastic about these things, and also what will happen over time. Will people get exhausted? I think that one dangerous thing is that there is now the narrative, this is the best thing we can do, so we should abandon everything else. We don't need the opposition, we don't need parliamentary institutions, we just need to be practicing this. I think it's a dangerous thing. I think that all these things should go in parallel. Like, yeah, we should be doing new stuff, and we should be we should also remember that we have control and we should exercise control. But we should fight on all fronts. I think that we're in a really, really dangerous situation, an absolutely dangerous situation, and no ally should be abandoned. Like, we need to also support the opposition, however bad they are. They're certainly not worse than the regime. We should support, and we should use all the channels we have. And we should work on strengthening the institutions, because now they are destroyed. They have been captured and they're destroyed. And we should also take back the institutions and strengthen them from within.
Oh, thank you. And I would love to continue, but I think it's late for everyone. For Teona, it's even plus 3 hours, so it's late everywhere. Thank you so much. I think we will actually come back to this. Maybe we do another round like this. Maybe we're gonna go a closer look into Serbia, closer look into Romania. I think there's a lot to have an eye on, to show solidarity. We'll send a follow-up email to everyone with the recording, but also 2 links to where you can support the organizations, where you can help, so where you can really act on as well. And thank you all. A lot of solidarity from us to the movement, to everyone is here. Please carry on the message. I think this is the most important thing we can do. And want to just post the link also to the next webinar we're doing on Monday, which has a lot to do with Elon Musk and TikTok and X, and it's a big influence on what we have all just heard, this whole digital space. So we carry on with that, and we'll be back in the 4 countries here, and generally with this big movement that's happening there. Thanks so much. Have a very nice evening and stay safe. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.